Welcome to the GoldenComm Podcast. Special guest with me today, David Deniger. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Okay, awesome. Hey, we're in 2026. Last year was 2025. I must say, I mean this emphatically, one of the highlights for me in 2025 was meeting you.
Well, it's mutual.
Well, and it's funny how I met you, and it's kind of lucky because you sent me an email out of the blue, and I, like you, I probably get a lot of emails out of the blue, and this email was from a Mac.com email, and it said something. It said, you work with one of the companies that I started or involved, and I thought to myself, well, I better write him back. And you never know, right? So I write him back, and it turns out, boy, one of our largest and best clients, Hyphen Solutions, you founded it, and you're still the chairman of the board.
Right.
And you'd written in, I'd never met you before, didn't even recognize your name. And so we got together. And the reason why I mentioned that is because Hyphen Solutions, the company that I met you through, the story of Hyphen is an interesting story in its own right, and we'll get to it. But that story has transitioned into your latest Golden Years project story in what you're doing now, which is, frankly, so interesting. So we're going to get to all that. But for me to get there, the more I learn about you, the more I learn about why you're doing what you're doing. And so I want to talk about David, and that starts from the beginning. For instance, who was your mom and dad? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And what year were you born, if you don't mind sharing?
No, I don't. I'll be 81 this March. So I was born in 1945, one of the early baby boomers. Grew up in Dallas, Texas, have an older brother. And my folks were quite young when they married. And turns out they were kind of a mess. And I know that because I spent a lot of time in therapy with them over the years and gotten to know kind of their stories and histories. But my mom was the wild child, only daughter of a Dallas socialite woman who had great expectations of her becoming a debutante and a member of the junior league and all that stuff. And my mom wouldn't have any part of that. And she ran off, actually eloped with my father, who was a man's man. I think he was Golden Glove champion of New Orleans. He was kind of the worst nightmare, drove a motorcycle of an aristocratic mom in Dallas, Texas. But they married early. I think she was 16 or 17. And we grew up in Dallas. My dad went on to get a degree in electrical engineering from SMU. Actually built a house right near campus by himself, which was where my brother and I, where we lived in early 1950, 55.
So your mom comes from Means, but she's a wildflower, hippie or whatever you call it during that area. And she falls in love and marries with a Renaissance guy who likes motorcycles and work with his hands.
Exactly.
And they hook up early.
Very early.
And they probably have you early. Or your brother's 18 years old.
Actually, they were. The story was, and I've done the math, and I think it's true. They actually eloped and didn't tell anybody. I think they were married for at least a year, without living together. But my brother was born, a year or so after, and obviously I was 18 months later.
In 1945.
1945.
Okay. So you do, I guess you're a kid, right? You do your high school, and then you and I talked a little bit before. You said that really college was a big deal to you.
It really was. I was kind of my folks went on to get a divorce, and my mom had some substance abuse issues. And actually, I grew up with her a little bit in Al-Anon and Alateen. I was very involved with her journey to get well. But when they divorced, my dad actually raised my brother and I. So that was kind of weird because he didn't really get me. Again, a very straight-laced engineer, but a sweet man. He just had a a book of rules, and you either abided by the rules or you didn't, and I didn't most of the time.
And he's a Texas Instrument guy?
Yeah, he went to work for TI. And I learned, my mom was sort of in a world of particles and waves. She was all waves. She had no particles. So she was quite a spiritual, focused person, and my dad obviously was the opposite. But I learned a lot from my dad because I learned to play defense from my dad because he measured almost every decision he made that I was aware of was all about money. It was he was a Depression era kid, and he went to work literally every Friday for Texas Instruments for 30 years, thinking he might be laid off. So he had an enormous amount of fear, and particularly when they divorced, and so he was responsible for my brother and I, and that was a big burden for him. And of course, when he was at work, we were off doing whatever. But he was always there. He was a salt of the earth kind of guy.
Yeah, hard worker and a product of the Depression.
Yep.
Right?
And so I was kind of a mess. I was not a great student. I didn't really care about much stuff like that. But when I got to the University of Texas, I decided when I was about 5 or 6 I wanted to be an architect. And I didn't give it much more thought to my second year of design at the UT when I was presenting my semester project to a jury of, graduate students and professors and stuff, and I had my boards up, and it was kind of a complicated landscape park design. I'll never forget it. And I was up there talking about all the aspects and all the design parameters that I was dealing with. And when I got done, my professor comes up to me. He was Cuban. He was a wonderful man. Davino was his name, and he comes up and he puts his hand on both my shoulders and he says, David, he says, when I look at your work, I don't see so much. He says, when you talk about it, I see everything. You should be a salesman. He said, you've got good ideas, but I don't think you'll ever get it through the head of a pencil. So I literally walked out, packed up my little MGA that I had at the time, and drove back to Dallas. I dropped out of school, which was a mistake because when you get Fs and everything, it's hard to bring that average up later. But so I did flunk out once, and I went back the subsequent fall. But I was joined a fraternity, and there were 8 or 10 guys that just kind of slapped me around and took me under their wing and kind of taught me how to grow up. And they're still dear friends of mine.
Oh, neat. So your contemporaries at UT were a big part of your life.
Yeah. Oh, huge.
Huge part.
And it was a crazy time. I mean, we're talking about the 60s. We're talking about the Vietnam War. We're talking about Stokely Carmichael and the race riots in East Texas where they were hosing people and dogs were chewing up people, and everybody was kind of pissed off. They just were. It was angry, but we were not a good fraternity, but we were aspirational. And Darryl Royal was a coach, and we won 2 national championships while I was a student there. And so it just got to be, we can do this. And I always thought that you're dealt a hand of cards, and those were your cards. And what I learned from these guys is you could get better cards. So that was a wonderful lesson for me.
So when did you get out of UT?
So I graduated in 68. Took me an extra year because when I changed majors, I didn't get credit for all my drafty
drawings.
Yeah, exactly. And I went to work leasing office buildings in Dallas, and it was a boom time in North Dallas in those days. Lots of construction, and I learned. I was an owner's rep. I wasn't an agent representing anybody. I was hired by a building owner, and I learned how to fill up the buildings. And it turned out that was the hard part of things, but I figured out how to do it, and it was really integral to my later successful ventures in real estate. Was being able to create the income streams to support the buildings that we built.
So you get right. So I imagine in 68 and 69, there isn't a lot going on in Austin.
In what?
In Austin.
I couldn't get a job. I would have stayed in Austin.
I would say it's probably a pretty small town.
Oh, yeah, no. In
Almost
those
like,
days,
like,
in those
almost
days,
like Waco today.
Yeah,
Just not a lot
in those days, you couldn't build a building taller than the Capitol.
Okay, so you go to Dallas because there's the economy there.
Well, and I got married to my high school sweetheart, and I had a son. So I was
You should go back home.
Yeah, so
go
I
back
was
home.
full-time dad at that point.
I gotcha.
So I was
Okay.
scared. I needed a job.
And then you get a job, and you are leasing. You're just in commercial real estate doing
Right.
leases.
Right.
Okay, so what does that look like? Does that look like canvassing, knocking on doors, phoning people? How do you get good at a leasing agent in the 70s?
Well,
What do you do?
I think there were a couple of things I learned pretty quickly because of a lot of cold calling. First of all, I figured out that it was easier to find people who were thinking about moving than talking people into moving. So I decided my pitch was going to be focused on people who were somewhat unsettled where they were. And the other thing that I did that was kind of smart was that I'd focus on buildings that were full. Because normally in an office building with 3 and 5 year leases, people can't move even if they want to, unless the building's full. And then that landlord would likely release it to another tenant at a higher rate. So they'd probably let people go. So I'd focus on buildings that were full. And I had a pretty simple pitch. I'd call them up and I'd say, hey, I'm David Deniger. I'm building a building down the street. I'm calling to see if you might be a prospect for me. And I'd shut up. And they'd either say, well, we kind of don't. We need a conference room, and we've got a couple of, or they'd say, I own this building, you bastard, don't come around here again. So anyway, I just kept doing that and ended up keeping a good record of people's tendency and when their leases were up. And so I had a backlog, a database of prospects that I could use both in office and commercial.
So you like to work hard, because that's not kicking back.
No, that's not kicking.
That's not kicking back.
That's not kicking
Okay. So who's mentoring you through this, or are you one of those guys that figured it out all on his own?
No. I think one of the skills that I developed early, and I think this was early childhood, was paying attention. And when I mean paying attention, I mean really paying attention. What are people doing, what they're not doing, what they're saying, when you say something, how it affects them, just really resonating with the sort of the vibe of people. And I think I had one guy who was an early, can we cuss on this?
Yes, you make us.
So Bob Thornton is his name. I think he's still alive. He's related to the Thornton families where all the highways are named after, but West Texas, crusty kind of guy. And he grabbed me around the throat one day, and he took a liking to me. We had been involved in some Nature Conservancy issues, and he I don't know why, but he grabbed me by the collar and he said, David, he said, let me tell you something. Providence does not shine long on a chicken shit. And I don't know why that just resonated with me. It's not only it's working hard but also being able to take a risk, a sort of a calculated risk, and those who can manage those transitions have a chance to be successful.
Yeah, that's a good one. So you're leasing. So I know a little bit about you, and I know your career. You're not getting to who you are leasing other people's buildings.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was working.
What happens?
So I was working for the Hunt family, Herbert in particular, and developing a shopping center in North Dallas.
Herbert Hunt is oil mogul. Is that right?
So Herbert and Bunker and several others were.
This is the Hunt family.
This is H.L. Hunt's family.
Right. Okay.
That were oil and gas people. And so they had an enormous real estate holdings for the family. And so I was just a hired gun to lease space. And this was a retail center, which is a little different than office, but it was a good experience for me. So we'd built it out, filled it up, and I was kind of wondering what was next. And Herbert said, "Hey, David, you've done a great job. We've got a big center we're doing in Plano. We'd like you to come and develop it out for us." And I said, "Great, Herbert, I'd love to, but we need to talk about how I'm going to get paid because I need some equity or something to make this other than a salary." And he kind of looked at me and says, "David, I'm sorry, you're not family." And I said, "Well, you're right, Herbert, and I'm sorry, but I ain't staying." So the architect on that project was a guy named Curly Broadnax, which is just a crazy guy. He had throat cancer. He couldn't talk. He belched when he talked, but he could draw. And we learned to communicate in a really kind of weird way. But he told me, because he knew I had more aspirations than Herbert was going to support. And so he told me, he said, "If you ever go out on your own, let me know. I'll design, I'll do a loan package for you." And so I called Curly, and we had a 2-story atrium kind of design he'd built in Houston with a developer down there. And I bought some land, I optioned some land near LBJ and the toll road. And my other mentor, and obviously the most important, was Herman Lay, who was the Frito PepsiCo guy. And he backed me in my first office building that I built that filled up nicely, and we sold it. And kind of he just became very supportive of kind of any projects that I thought was meritorious that he would fund. And so we had a 4 or 5 year period that I was able to create several projects for them. And I was kind of part of the estate planning. I didn't realize it at the time, but he'd guarantee the interim construction loan, and his kids would actually own most of it. So we'd build it, sell it, and that was a way for him to get capital to his kids.
This is Lay Potato Chips,
Yeah.
PepsiCo.
Yeah.
So that's fortuitous that you run into him.
No kidding.
Yeah. So now you're filling up your building,
Right.
but the building's not built. So you're building the building,
I'm hiring the general contractor and the architect and
Yeah.
overseeing the construction.
and that was your first one.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, here we go. Now you got a taste of it.
Yeah. No, I'm not going back. at
You're
this
not going
point.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you successfully built it. You
Yep.
successfully filled it, and
We sold it.
You sold it. Okay. I got you. And then what?
So
Well, now you got some money.
I got a little money, and but the market was horrible. They changed the tax law on real estate. They changed the depreciation, and good policy. The old policy was no good, but they did it immediately, and a lot of projects were over leveraged, and there was a lot of failure. And so, but because I loved Herman, and I think I've told you this, that I sort of, without knowing it, kind of transitioned from a principal to a fiduciary with him. And so I didn't want to take it. I knew he would do it if I pitched him. But I never could find, I was looking at projects that were projecting rents at levels I couldn't get tenants in my own building to pay at renewal. So I knew, and they loved me and they loved the building, and I knew those projects wouldn't work. So actually I was managing the property, so I had an income stream, but I started teaching school. I taught at Greenhill, the Greenhill School. I taught photography and economics for about 2 years.
Yeah. Why it flushed out.
Yeah.
Why it flushed out. All right. Any other interesting deals? This is the 80s now.
Yeah, this is the 80s. I think the unrealized benefit of that kind of school teaching, which is ironic, because my dad would say, "David, you got to get a job." So, but as a result, there was a good bit of chaos in the industry, and so all of a sudden these banks started failing, and so I became kind of the only real estate guy around who either wasn't in jail or didn't have a lot of bad debts. And so I kind of transitioned to more of a portfolio manager. So I was working for banks and thrifts, helping them deal with this slog of properties coming in through foreclosure.
Oh, it's almost like the Big Short before the Big Short.
Yeah.
All right. And
that
Dallas
actually,
is hit hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That actually turned into about a 10-year run of different positions that I had, but I ended up running all of GE Capital's equity investing, which was basically buying portfolios of properties, which kind of leads into the technology end, because there was no technology to manage large portfolios of assets. People couldn't even figure out what the cash balances at the property levels were. So I became very interested in sort of systematic ways to deal with a sort of a portfolio of properties that had all kinds of different hair on them and issues but just trying to keep up with the money was a
Let me
struggle.
get this right. So you're with GE now, and so you have capital, large capital, and they're buying distressed assets, and there isn't a system that keeps track outside of a file folder of what's going on with all the properties.
Let me tell you how bad it was. So GE called because I had some experience with a couple of large banks that had failed, and a guy named Mike Frazier had just come back he was president of GE Japan, and he came back to GE, and he decided he wanted to build this portfolio capability. So he actually, through our friend Don McNamara, he calls me and he says, "David, I understand you know something about the distressed asset business, both buying and managing." And I said, "Yeah, Mike, I do." And he said, "Well, we want you to come up and help us do that." And the last thing I wanted to do is go to work for GE Capital. And I said, "You know, Mike, if you got a second, let me just tell you how to do it on the phone, because it's not really complicated." And he said, "What?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "You just take the assets, you sort them out by property type, because retail ain't like industrial. And so you hire people who are product specialists, and you just work through the systems." He said, "No, I want you to come up and visit with us." So I came up, and on the way up, I was trying to figure out on what basis would I take a position like this. So I get up there, and I realized their problem was they had $4 or $5 billion of non-performing loans themselves, and that's really what they were interested in. And it was so bad that they would convert these mortgages to cash flow mortgages, so there wasn't a fixed payment anymore, and they would send their checks for the debt service, but their loan servicing system wouldn't take a check that wasn't for the amount of the amortization of the loan for that payment. So they were just stuffing these checks in their drawers. Because if they had have accepted it as full payment, then when they went to foreclosure, there would be a case that they had modified the loan in some way. So it was a mess. But anyway, I decided it might be a good opportunity. So I walk in and I pitch Gary Wendt and Mike. I said, "Guys, this is the way to do it. You buy the assets, you create a wholly owned subsidiary. I need a little piece of it. And as we buy these assets, you contract with my entity, our entity, to manage and distribute and dispose of these. And you pay us a management fee and a disposition fee and a little vig. And that's the only way to do it," knowing they wouldn't do that. And they kind of looked at me and said, "That's exactly what we want to do." Well, I later figured out the way that GE kept score in those days, it was all about head count. So if they could do this without increasing head count at GE Capital, this would be a good thing. And it also was such that they could clip it when it was over, and all those people would go away. So we created a company called GE Capital Real Estate Group, and we bought and sold $4 or $5 billion worth of assets over a 4-year period.
Wow. That makes you, David, a big name in real estate in Dallas. Everyone knows David.
Well, some people do.
Yeah. All right. So any other interesting deals? I mean, I know there's on your LinkedIn, which is not a very active LinkedIn, which you don't need to have an active LinkedIn, but you've got like partial owner of the Stars, partial owner of the Texas. You're not really a sports guy, but you've got these investments in these professional teams.
So one of my brothers that I talked about at the University of Texas was a guy named Tom Hicks. And Tom was in fact, my first trip to New York City, Tom I went with Tom and Dick Vermillion, and he had just gotten a new Mustang, 1968 or 69 Mustang. And his dad owned a radio station in Port Arthur. And he had traded out advertising with the Sheraton hotels for funny money, basically frequent flyer points, but we didn't call it that then. But it was literally script that was good at Hilton hotels. So Dick and Tom and I got in his Mustang and took off. And we were destitute until we got to a Sheraton. And we had the penthouse, and it was a great trip, kind of a coming of age time. Sadly, Tom died 2 weeks ago, and his brother died, unrelated, but both of cancer. So Steve and Tom both have passed. Big loss for the state of Texas.
Oh, that's just recently.
Yeah.
And he got you into these sports things?
I'm a partner now at Hicks Muse. I'm running a real estate fund called Olympus. And Tom decides he wants to, he's a sports guy. He decides he bought the Dallas Stars and then the Texas Rangers. And he made all the partners invest in the teams. I said, Tom, I'm not really a sports guy. And he said, Deniger, you're buying part of the team, so shut up. And so I did. And he did that because if he was working on the team rather than the firm, we wouldn't be pissed off that he wasn't paying attention to business. So he made us get in his other business, which turned out to be an amazing, fun thing. We won the Stanley Cup in '99. And, I'm on the ice in the dog pile with Brett Hull and Madonna, and it was a great time. But I'm not a big sports fan.
Okay, so your buddy makes you buy into these properties, so he doesn't want you upset that he's horsing around with sports, because you said Olympus.
Yeah.
Now, I did do some research on the Olympus, which is still operating today.
Actually, not. It still exists. We had three funds. I guess we invested about $4 billion in properties, hospitality, multifamily, land development. Actually, I was talking. I bought Arnold Palmer Golf Management business, so we were in the golf business, and did a bunch of.
You bought the Arnold Palmer Management Company.
Yeah.
Did you know? Arnold didn't own that.
So Arnold had an equity piece, but he had financial partners in most everything he did. Okay. So we grew the business. We started with about 25 courses of managed courses and grew it to about 40. The Presidio in San Francisco was one of the courses. We had several private clubs that we managed properties for, but it was a real pleasure to getting to know him.
Yeah, I bet. I do know that where you live now is in a very obscure place in California that nobody really knows except for this guy named Clint Eastwood, I think has put Carmel on the map.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about where you live now.
So it's kind of a fun story. I met this woman that lived in San Francisco that I was interested. I was single at the time, and we started dating. I lived in Dallas. She lived in San Francisco, and so over a couple of years, I convinced her to marry me. And actually, after we got married, she said, David, I agreed to marry you. I didn't say I was going to live with you. Anyway, so we were looking for a place to get married, and she was very adamant, no wedding. My father's not giving me away. She's a brilliant economist, worked all over the globe. And so I was talking to her dad, and one day, who was a park ranger in California, and actually when her parents divorced, she stayed with her dad, and she grew up in the state parks in Big Sur and all up and down the coast. But I was asking him about what a cool place would be, and he said, David, there's a place in Carmel Valley that my grandfather took me to the gun club down Robinson Canyon Road, and there's a building that he said was Zorro's hideout. an old hacienda with kind of moss everywhere and fog and stuff. So he said, you ought to go see if you can find Zorro's hideout. So I got in a car one day and I drove down from the city, and off Carmel Valley Road, Rancho San Carlos Road, it's a 20,000 acre. I think it's the second or third largest existing original Spanish land grant in California. So I drove in, and the owners of it, they were trying to develop it. And when I got there, it was about 10 o'clock on a Friday night, and they were shooting a commercial in the building. So they had all the furniture out on the lawn, but they had big lights pouring in the windows. And it was kind of a weird looking place. I thought, this is Zorro's hideout with lighting. So I find the guy, his name's Tom Gray, and I said, hey, Tom, could I rent this place for a wedding? And he said, well, we don't have any staff, and da-da-da. So I said, don't worry about that. So anyways, he called me a couple of days later, and he said, I think we can do that. So being a real estate guy, I said, well, tell me about what's going on there. And he said, we're trying to develop this. We have some Japanese partners. We're kind of gotten sideways with them. And I'm going, the night of our event, they're going to padlock this place or something. So we go down, actually got married at Stone Pine, which is further up the valley. And just coincidentally, 2 weeks later, I was in New York. The New York Common Fund was an investor of mine. And there at the board meeting was Bill Walton. And Bill ran the Westbrook funds. And kind of competitor, but friendly and great guy. And I said, hey, Bill, what are you guys looking at these days? And he said, repositioning some multifamily, some hospitality, and a land deal in Carmel. And I go, Rancho San Carlos? And he said, how'd you know? And I said, well, I've been there. Anyway, we ended up buying it from the Japanese, and today it's 20,000 acres. We donated 18,000 acres to a land conservancy that we formed, endowed that with $25 million, built a Fazio golf course, has a huge equestrian center, and it's one of the most spectacular places in the world. I run with my dogs every morning in 2,000-year-old redwoods, just straight up the mountain. It's just amazing.
That is...
It's called the Preserve.
The Preserve. And the name of the Fazio golf course is
the Preserve.
The Preserve. Yeah. And that is not in the...
Carmel by the Sea is
Carmel
what
by the
most
Sea
people
is where
think
people know downtown, but you're up in a little bit in the mountains.
We're up in the valley. We're in the horse country.
And you live on a farm now.
Well, it's actually a big cattle ranch.
Cattle ranch.
The Conservancy runs we do a whole lot of wildfire mitigation with cattle, and anyway, it's a special place.
Special place. Okay. Wow. Well, interesting, just flat out interesting. And the time has now come to talk about Hyphen.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we want to dovetail into this new project that you're working on and how we are working with each other. So Hyphen is, you always describe it as, we're just the pipes.
Yeah.
So for those that don't understand how homes get built, you understand how homes get built. Talk to me about what Hyphen's role is in the home building industry.
So the home building industry is segmented like everything, and for a custom home builder on a cost plus contract, cycle time doesn't matter. If it takes a month, it's a month. If it takes 6 months, it's economically better off for them. So not that people take advantage of that, but it's just not an issue. Production home builders, unlike most everything else, if you go online to buy a Dell computer, you pick the CPU, you pick your processor, you pick the monitor, you pick all that stuff, you send them the money, and 2 weeks later they send you the computer. Production home building is not that way. Production home builders, cycle time is everything. So when a couple comes in and they pick out all their selections and they sign the contract, they put down a deposit, and the home builder starts the home, and they don't get paid until they're finished with the home. So the sequence of work, the duration of work, the coordination with subcontractors and distributors becomes really important. So being kind of a Mac guy, and actually I'm a Mac guy because I'm a photographer, and we didn't do network stuff. We had just workstations in the old days. So what we do is we pitched big builders. We went after big builders first, and we said, look, your ERP, which are mainly Oracle products, they don't have, the scheduling systems are not any good on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to integrate into your back office. And when you start a home, you're going to push a button, and that's going to load 100 to 150 purchase orders into our system. And then all of the subcontractors are going to get a notice that they have a purchase order, and they log in. And so all of the communication from then on, all the way through raw material to distributors to manufacturers to installers, they all become part of this network of information, of status. And in the implementation part of this business, we sit down with builders, home builders, and it's kind of like therapy because we get everybody in the room. We get ops and we get finance, and we get legal, and everybody in the room, and we say, okay, here's the house, here's the floor plan, here's the elevation. What's the first thing you do to start this house? Well, we deliver the porta potty. No, we don't do that. We do this. So they get in a fight about what's the sequence. And so we just say, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what's the first thing we do, who's going to do it, and how long is it going to take. What's the second thing we're going to do, who's going to do it, how long is it going to take, and how much is it going to cost. And we do a basically an implementation schedule for that floor plan. And the good thing about, and the reason production home builders like this is they build the same thing over and over again. So unlike a custom builder, once you build a template for this, then it's replicable in most markets, although California is obviously different because of earthquake issues, and Florida is different because of hurricane issues. But generally speaking, the big ticket items are the same. So when we do that, then when they start a home, that all gets loaded to an iPad for the guy in the field, and they just do what it tells them to do every day. And that allows a superintendent to be able to oversee, twice or three times as many homes. Because before we had our system, a superintendent would get up at 5 in the morning as soon as it was light, walk through a project with a notepad, take notes, and then sit in his truck and call subs. On our system, if you're the countertop guy and your schedule says you're supposed to install today, you can look in the system and see if the counter are in. Because if the counters aren't in, you're not going to go, because you're not going. It's either your top's either going to get stolen or broken if you can't install them when you get there. So it just creates this transparency for everybody. And being the pipes, also, I think our success has been because we're seen as an honest broker in the system. So when we do these templates, we also with their parameters. So if you're going to order windows, usually originally they'd say, well, we'll give them 2 weeks notice. And we'll go, no, they need a month notice. Why not give them a month notice? So we're always pushing for more time, more information, more stuff. And as a result, what we've done, I think the most success is with the big home builders, which historically have been run by purchasing departments, and purchasing departments have been run by big guys who are crushing people as a means of creating the lowest price possible. With our system, we're able to say to these big crushing guys, says, if we can save your subs $1, if you've got any negotiating skills, you can get 80 cents of it. So all of a sudden, everything's flipped. So how can we, for example, a purchase order, if it just says carpet upgrade number 4 for this subdivision, the guy can't load his truck from that. He's got to go figure out what that was. He's got to go figure out, he bid on that 4 months ago. So if we can attach the SKU to that purchase order and they can load the truck, then all of a sudden it gets easier for them. So we're all about reducing transaction costs in the supply chain.
So you took an industry that's 100 years old, mass producing homes, Lennar and Toll Brothers and Shea, these are the usual suspects that are building. And you basically taught them how to project manage their supply chain.
I would not in a second say that. In fact, you can't get on our system unless you already have a process.
Okay, you have a process.
So we're just automating the process.
You're automating the process.
So
Okay.
today we have 20 of the top 25 builders on our system, and last year, 1 out of every home built in North America was built on our network.
1 out of every how many?
3.
So 33% of the homes built in North America by these large home builders
The large home builders,
are using your software, which you refer to as the pipes.
the pipes.
Okay.